Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a deep dive into some recent global developments.
Yes, we're going to unpack the current military and political landscape, mainly in Eastern Europe, looking at some key shifts.
Our mission is really to understand these complex events and what they might signal.
We've got information on significant military actions, Europe's changing defense thinking, and also a controversial appointment in Ukraine.
Okay, let's start with the immediate news. Yep. Things happening right on the front lines. We have details of major attacks on Ukraine.
That's right. We're seeing what's being called the largest air attack since the conflict really intensified.
The largest?
During one night, Saturday into Sunday, Russia launched, get this, over 400 drones.
400, wow.
And 77 cruise and ballistic missiles, targeting areas right across Ukraine, even far into the west, well away from the front.
That scale is just staggering. Ukrainian President Zelensky himself reported, in just 1 week, 114 missiles, 12,270 drones, and 1,100 aerial bombs.
Yeah.
That level of intensity, what does it mean for Ukraine's defenses?
Well, it indicates sustained, relentless pressure. The idea seems to be to stretch their air defenses thin, hitting deep behind the lines.
Disrupting logistics, maybe.
Exactly. Disrupting logistics, command centers, hitting airfields. Tragically, in one recent attack, Ukraine lost an F-16 fighter jet. The pilot, just 32 years old, died.
That's a significant loss.
It is. Now, Ukrainian air defenses did manage to neutralize a lot of these threats they reported, taking down 436 drones and 39 missiles out of 477 drones and 60 missiles launched in one wave.
Still pretty effective then,
But 6 targets were still hit. And this constant barrage forces really tough decisions about where to deploy their limited high-value air defense systems like the Patriot or S-300. Equipment is being depleted.
And it's not just the number of attacks, is it? We're also hearing about specific, powerful Russian weapons being used more widely.
Yes, that's right. We're seeing widespread use of the 220mm TOS-1A Solntsepyok. It's a thermobaric artillery system.
Sometimes called vacuum artillery, right? Though this term can be a bit misleading.
It can be, yeah. Thermobaric is more accurate. These shells release a chemical cloud, like an aerosol, and then ignite it.
Creating a massive explosion.
A massive high-temperature blast that generates this huge, prolonged pressure wave. It consumes the oxygen in the immediate area.
So it's the blast and the heat, primarily.
Primarily. The pressure wave is devastating, especially in enclosed spaces. The oxygen depletion and the subsequent sort of vacuum effect add to the lethality inside bunkers or buildings. It's extremely effective against entrenched forces.
And cities, trenches, caves.
Exactly. Places where conventional shells might be less effective.
So how does this fit into the bigger picture? The use of these weapons alongside the bombardment?
Well, it coincides with this intensified pressure across Ukraine. And we're also seeing reports of Russian forces making advances, particularly in the Donbass region, since mid-April.
Advances?
Yes, including capturing apparently one of Europe's largest lithium deposits near Shevchenko. There are also descriptions of heavy losses among some Ukrainian elite units.
And depletion of equipment?
Yes, key equipment. Air defense systems, as we mentioned, but also tanks, M1A1 Abrams, Leopard 2A6s, T-80s. It points towards a grinding war of attrition where Ukraine is facing some serious material challenges.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now. How is Europe responding to all this? It feels like there's a real shift happening in how the continent views security.
There absolutely is. You see a much greater focus now on defense preparedness across Europe. A lot of this is driven by concerns about, well, the reliability of future U.S. support for transatlantic security.
And Finland joining NATO last year really changed the map, didn't it?
It really did. Doubled NATO's border with Russia to nearly 2,600 kilometers, stretching all the way from the Arctic down to Belarus. That automatically increases the focus on that eastern flank.
And is NATO itself sounding the alarm? Assessing readiness?
Oh, definitely. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte recently said Russia could be ready to use force against the alliance within 5 years. He stressed, we're all now on the eastern flank.
Strong words.
And Ukrainian President Zelensky has also mentioned Russian plans for new military operations potentially impacting NATO territory. So these warnings are definitely raising the stakes and impacting NATO's approach to collective defense. The urgency is palpable.
Which brings us to the transatlantic relationship. How have statements from U.S. President Trump factored into these European defense discussions?
They've factored in significantly. His remarks, particularly suggesting that Article 5, NATO's Mutual Defense Clause, can be interpreted differently, well, that caused real nervousness in European capitals.
Undermining that core guarantee.
Exactly. It prompted a fundamental rethink of Europe's own capabilities on a scale we haven't seen in decades. Many leaders are now questioning, quite openly, how reliable and long-lasting those U.S. security guarantees really are. It's pushed Europe towards needing more self-reliance.
So what does that mean in practice? For spending, for strategy?
Well, NATO leaders have doubled down on their commitment to collective defense. They've agreed to boost defense spending, aiming for 5% of GDP over the next decade.
5%. That's a huge increase for many.
It is. There's some flexibility in how the funds are used, but it's a major commitment. The question, though, is speed. Can these investments happen fast enough?
And is the threat seen as an imminent invasion?
Many military experts think Russian President Putin's goal might be more nuanced, not necessarily a full-scale invasion of, say, the Baltics, but rather testing NATO's resolve, finding weaknesses, trying to sow division, and maybe disintegrate the alliance from within, eroding that trust.
Okay, so with that European-wide commitment, let's maybe drill down into how specific countries on that eastern flank are preparing. Finland, for instance, with that very long border now.
Right. And Finland's approach is fascinating because it's so deeply rooted in their history. They share that 3,340-kilometer border, and they've basically been preparing for an eastern attack for 80 years.
Good years.
Yeah. It's part of their national identity almost. Conscripts are highly motivated. They hold exercises just kilometers from the border. Over 80% of Finns say they'd be willing to defend the country.
And they have practical preparations.
Oh, absolutely. Huge stockpiles, 6 months of fuel, 9 months of grain, an incredible network of bomb shelters for 4.4 million people. Even their command centers and fighter jets are buried like 30 meters under granite.
Wow. And their strategy.
It includes possibly giving up territory temporarily, using their difficult terrain forests, lakes to their advantage, evacuating civilians, and being ready to destroy infrastructure like roads and bridges near the border to slow any advance.
And what about the Baltic states? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they're often seen as, well, more vulnerable.
They're generally considered the most vulnerable, yes. Partly history, partly geography. The distance from the Russian border to the Baltic Sea is only about 200 kilometers in places.
Not much room for maneuver.
Not much room for tactical retreat or for reinforcements to arrive easily. And then you have the Suwalki corridor.
That narrow strip of land.
Yeah, that 100-kilometer stretch between Lithuania and Poland, squeezed between Russia's Kaliningrad exclave and Belarus. It's a critical choke point, a major NATO concern.
So how are they responding? Spending more?
Definitely spending more. They're also aiming for that 5% of GDP target for defense. And they're physically strengthening borders, fences, bunkers, anti-tank barriers.
I heard something about a drone wall.
Yes, Latvia proposed that. Estonia is planning, I think, 600 bunkers. There are multinational NATO battalions deployed there already. And Germany is sending a whole brigade, about 5,000 troops, to Lithuania permanently over the next few years.
A permanent deployment. That's significant.
It is. And they're also developing plans for mass civilian evacuation, just in case.
And Poland. Another key country right there on the front line.
Poland is crucial, bordering both Ukraine and Belarus. They are also heavily fortifying their borders and boosting their military significantly. Prime Minister Donald Tusk is pushing hard for more EU defense spending, and Poland itself plans to double its army.
Double. To how many?
500,000 personnel. It's incredibly ambitious. They're also looking at universal mandatory military training for adult men.
And physical defenses.
Yes. Investing in long-range missiles. They've already built that 5.5-meter steel fence along the Belarus border, but the big project is the Eastern Shield.
Tell me about that.
It's a comprehensive system, anti-tank ditches, obstacles like dragon's teeth, those concrete pyramids, and potentially mined areas too. They've allocated 2.3 billion euros and got EU funding.
Mines. I thought those were banned.
Well, Poland, like the Baltic states, actually voted to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention, which bans anti-personnel mines.
Really?
Yes. It shows just how seriously they view the potential threat, that they're willing to reserve the option to use mines for defense if they feel it's absolutely necessary. It's a profound shift.
Okay, let's change tack slightly.
Yeah.
Staying with Ukraine, but moving to an internal development that's causing some waves. A controversial appointment.
Yes, quite a bit of debate around the appointment of Alexander Alfarov as the new head of the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory.
The Institute of National Memory.
Yeah.
That's sensitive post.
Extremely sensitive. Alfarov is a historian, a publicist, and also a former soldier with the Azov Brigade.
Azov. That name carries baggage, often linked to the far right, though they say they've reformed into a regular unit.
Exactly. And that association, combined with some of his past statements, is what makes this controversial.
What kind of statements?
Well, he's published a lot, got a big YouTube following. He fought with Azov's 3rd Assault Brigade after 2022, led a de-Russification expert group in Kyiv. But some remarks have raised eyebrows.
Such as?
He reportedly compared Russian President Putin to Adolf Hitler, which isn't uncommon, but then went on to say Hitler was, quote, a highly educated person influenced by German philosophy and art.
That's an odd framing.
It is. And he's also made comments calling Russians not orcs, but goblins, and a people without Christian ethics. Dehumanizing language.
And associations.
Critics also point to his connection with an exhibition that apparently presented the activities of the SS Galicia Division respectfully.
The Waffen-SS Division.
Yeah.
That's highly problematic territory.
Extremely. Given the division's collaboration with Nazi Germany and allegations of war crimes, any respectful presentation is bound to be controversial, especially for the head of the Institute of National Memory.
So what are the implications of putting someone with this background, these statements, in charge of shaping Ukraine's national narrative, especially during wartime?
Well, critics, like one observer at the Berliner Zeitung, call the rhetoric scandalous. They see it as trivializing Nazi crimes and, dehumanizing Russians.
Which potentially plays into Russian propaganda narratives.
That's the risk. Russian President Putin falsely uses denazification as a war justification. Appointing someone with these kinds of comments and associations, even if his specific unit has changed, could inadvertently give ammunition to that propaganda. It could also alienate international partners who are very sensitive, understandably, to anything that seems to downplay Nazi history.
It puts Kyiv in a tough spot.
It does. How do you balance recognizing someone's military service or historical work with views that many find unacceptable? Does someone like this belong at the head of an institution meant to guard cultural memory impartially? Or does it undermine trust?
What does the Ukrainian government say?
They emphasize his historical knowledge and military experience. But the appointment has definitely caused concern among historians and human rights groups, even inside Ukraine. It's a complex situation.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear, new episodes every day.